The scream pierced through the howling wind like a knife through cloth, and Quinn Zeller dropped the saddle he had been oiling, his heart hammering as he ran toward the barn door. Outside, the blizzard had transformed his Wyoming ranch into a white hell, visibility reduced to mere feet, and through that swirling chaos stumbled a figure wrapped in frozen layers, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other reaching desperately toward his barn. He reached her just as her knees buckled, catching her weight against his chest. Her face was pale as death itself, lips blue with cold, and her eyes held a wild terror that made his blood run cold despite the freezing temperatures. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The baby is coming now." Quinn did not hesitate. He swept her into his arms, shocked at how light she felt despite her condition, and carried her into the barn. The structure offered blessed relief from the wind, though the cold still bit through their clothes. He kicked the door shut behind them and rushed to the back corner where he kept clean hay bales stacked high. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he spread his bedroll over the hay, creating the best bed he could manage under the circumstances. "My name is Quinn," he said, helping her down onto the makeshift bed. "You are safe now. I am going to help you." She nodded, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely speak. "Amelia," she managed. "Amelia Everhart. My husband, he died 3 weeks ago. Fever. I was trying to reach my sister in Cheyenne, but the storm came so fast." Her words were cut off by another scream as a contraction seized her body. Quinn had delivered foals and calves more times than he could count, but a human baby was different. His hands trembled as he stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then grabbed every blanket and piece of cloth he could find in the barn. "How far apart are the pains?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Close," she gasped, her fingers digging into his arm. "So close. I think the baby is coming right now." The next hours became a blur of controlled chaos. Quinn heated water on the small stove he kept in the barn for cold nights, tore his cleanest shirt into strips, and talked to Amelia in low, reassuring tones even as his own heart raced with fear. The wind screamed outside like a living creature, rattling the barn walls, but inside Quinn focused entirely on the woman before him. Amelia was stronger than she looked. Between contractions, she told him fragments of her story. She had been married for barely 2 years to a man named William, a shopkeeper who had moved them from Ohio to pursue dreams of Western prosperity. They had been happy, she said, tears streaming down her face. And then the fever had come, sudden and merciless, taking William in less than a week. Left alone, pregnant, and with no means to support herself, she had packed what little she could carry and started the journey to her sister's homestead near Cheyenne. "I should have waited," she sobbed between pains, "but I had no money for rent. The landlord was going to throw me out." "You did what you had to do," Quinn said firmly, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "You survived. That takes courage." Another contraction ripped through her, stronger than before, and she screamed again. Quinn positioned himself at the end of the bedroll, his heart in his throat. This was it. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. "Push when you feel the need," he instructed, praying he sounded more confident than he felt. "Your body knows what to do." Amelia bore down with a guttural cry that spoke of pain beyond measure. Quinn saw the crown of the baby's head and his hands moved instinctively, supporting, guiding. The barn filled with Amelia's cries and the howling wind, a symphony of life and nature at their most raw and powerful. "Again," he urged. "You are doing so well. One more push." She pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly the baby slipped free into Quinn's waiting hands. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The tiny infant was silent, blue-tinged, and Quinn's blood turned to ice. Then training took over. He cleared the baby's mouth and nose with his finger, rubbed the small back vigorously, and breathed a prayer to any god that might be listening. The baby's chest hitched. A tiny cough, and then a wail that was the most beautiful sound Quinn had ever heard. "A boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion he could not name. "You have a son." He wrapped the baby quickly in the cleanest, warmest cloth he had, then placed the squirming bundle against Amelia's chest. Her arms came up automatically, cradling her son with a tenderness that made Quinn's throat tight. Tears streamed down her face, but these were different from before. These were tears of joy mixed with exhaustion and relief. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her lips pressed to the baby's forehead. "Hello, my sweet boy." Quinn finished the necessary tasks with steady hands, cutting and tying the cord, making sure Amelia was comfortable and warm. The blizzard continued to rage outside, but in this corner of the barn, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the warmth of animals in their stalls, a strange peace settled over them. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, looking up at Quinn with eyes that shone with more than tears. "You saved our lives tonight." Quinn shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "You saved yourselves, I just happened to be here." "No," she insisted. "You were kind when you could have turned me away. You helped when others might have been afraid. I will never forget this." The night stretched on, and Quinn stayed close, checking on mother and baby, stoking the small stove to keep the temperature as warm as possible. The baby nursed for the first time, his tiny mouth finding what it needed by pure instinct. Amelia's color improved as the hours passed, the deathly pallor giving way to a more natural flush. Near dawn, the wind finally began to die down. Quinn stepped outside and found the world transformed into a pristine white landscape, beautiful and deadly. The snow had drifted nearly 4 feet high against the barn walls, and the path to his house was completely buried. It would take days to dig out properly, but at least the worst had passed. When he returned to the barn, Amelia was awake, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. She looked impossibly young in the early morning light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls, and Quinn wondered for the first time how old she really was. 20 perhaps, or 21. Far too young to be widowed and alone in this harsh land. "The storm has stopped," he reported, kneeling beside her. "But we are snowed in. It will be at least a day before I can clear a path to the house." "Can you manage here a while longer?" "We will manage," Amelia said with a small smile. "We have managed this long." Over the next 3 days, as Quinn dug them out from the blizzard's grip, an unexpected bond formed between them. He brought food from his house, hot meals that Amelia ate with grateful enthusiasm. She told him more about her life, about growing up in Ohio with her sister Alice, about meeting William and falling in love with his gentle manner and big dreams. Quinn found himself sharing things he rarely spoke of, about his own journey west after his parents died, about building this ranch from nothing, about the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole. "Why did you never marry?" Amelia asked one afternoon, watching as Quinn whittled a small toy from a piece of wood for when the baby grew older. He was quiet for a long moment, the knife moving in steady strokes. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. And ranching is hard work. Not many women want this kind of life." "Some might," Amelia said softly, "if they loved you enough." Their eyes met, and something passed between them that made Quinn's heart stutter. He looked away quickly, focusing on the wood in his hands. By the 4th day, the path to the house was clear enough to navigate, and Quinn insisted on moving Amelia and the baby inside. His home was modest, a 2-room cabin he had built himself, but it was warm and dry and infinitely more comfortable than the barn. He gave Amelia his bedroom and made himself a pallet by the fireplace, though she protested. "You have already done too much," she said, but he could see the relief in her eyes. "Nonsense," Quinn replied. "Rest and recover. That is what matters now." Weeks passed, and winter maintained its grip on the land. The roads remained impassable, making travel to Cheyenne impossible. Quinn found he did not mind. Each morning he woke to the sound of the baby fussing and Amelia's soft voice soothing him. She had named the boy Daniel, after her father, and Quinn found himself utterly captivated by the tiny human who had entered the world in his barn. But it was Amelia who truly captured his heart. She was resilient in a way that spoke of inner strength, rising each day to help with chores despite Quinn's protests that she should rest. She cooked meals that filled the cabin with warmth and delicious scents, mended his clothes without being asked, and brought a lightness to his home that had been missing for far too long. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Daniel asleep in a cradle Quinn had hastily constructed, Amelia spoke the words that had been hanging between them for weeks. "I should write to my sister," she said quietly. "When the road's clear, she will be expecting me." Quinn's chest tightened. "Of course. I can take you to Cheyenne as soon as it is safe to travel." "She lives another 100 miles past Cheyenne," Amelia continued, her eyes on the fire. "On a homestead with her husband. They have 5 children already. I would be another mouth to feed, and Daniel too. They would take us in because they are family, but it would be a burden." "You are not a burden," Quinn said fiercely, surprising himself with his vehemence. Amelia looked at him then, her green eyes searching his face. "What am I to you, Quinn?" The question hung in the air between them. Quinn could have deflected, could have given some safe answer about Christian duty or basic human kindness. Instead, he found himself speaking the truth that had been growing in his heart since that night in the barn. "You are everything," he said simply. "You and Daniel both. These past weeks, having you here, it has felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving your husband, but I have to tell you before you leave. I love you, Amelia. I love you, and I love that boy, and I want you to stay. Not as guests, not as charity cases, but as my family. If you will have me." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks, glinting in the firelight. "I thought I was alone in feeling this way. I thought I was betraying William's memory by caring for you so soon after his death. But Quinn, what I feel for you is real and true. You are kind and strong and good, and when I think of leaving, my heart breaks. I do not want to go." Quinn crossed the small distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, her face pressed against his chest, and he held her as if she might disappear if he let go. "Then stay," he whispered into her hair. "Marry me. Let me be a father to Daniel and a husband to you. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hands framing his face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Quinn, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, tasting the salt of her tears and the sweetness of her lips. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and new beginnings, of love born from hardship and hope rising from despair. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Florissant, the nearest town some 20 miles south. The roads had finally cleared enough for travel, and the preacher was happy to perform the ceremony. Amelia wore a dress that Quinn had purchased from the general store, simple blue calico that matched her eyes, and she had never looked more beautiful. Daniel, now nearly 3 months old, dozed through the entire service in the arms of Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, who cooed over him with grandmotherly affection. Quinn stood at the altar and felt his life shift into alignment, like puzzle pieces finally fitting together. When he slipped the simple gold band onto Amelia's finger and promised to love and cherish her until death parted them, he meant every word with an intensity that shook him to his core. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Ranch life was demanding, and money was often tight. But they faced each challenge together, and Quinn found that having Amelia by his side made even the hardest days bearable. She proved to be a natural rancher's wife, unafraid of hard work and quick to learn the skills she did not already possess. Daniel grew strong and healthy, his blue eyes and dark hair marking him as his mother's son. Quinn loved the boy as completely as if he were his own blood, rocking him when he cried in the night, teaching him to ride when he was barely steady on his feet, telling him stories by the fire on cold winter evenings. "You are a wonderful father," Amelia said one night as they lay in bed, Daniel finally asleep after a bout of teething. "He will never know the difference." "There is no difference," Quinn said firmly. "He is my son in every way that matters." 2 years after Daniel's birth, Amelia discovered she was expecting again. The pregnancy went smoothly, and when her time came, it was Quinn who delivered this baby too, though this time they were safely in their bedroom with the midwife from town as backup. The midwife arrived just as Amelia delivered a healthy baby girl with a lusty cry and a shock of red gold hair. "She looks like you," Amelia said, exhausted but radiant as Quinn placed their daughter in her arms. Quinn could only stare in wonder at this new life they had created together. "Sarah," he said, trying out the name they had chosen. "Little Sarah." Daniel, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his new sister and insisted on helping with everything. He brought her toys, sang to her in his off-key toddler voice, and stood guard by her cradle like a miniature sentinel. The sight of his son, for Daniel was truly his son in every sense, caring for his daughter filled Quinn with a contentment he had never imagined possible. The years rolled by in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered through Quinn's hard work and Amelia's thrifty management. They added rooms to the cabin, turning it into a proper house. They purchased more cattle, hired occasional hands during busy seasons, and slowly built something substantial and lasting. Daniel grew into a lanky boy with his mother's green eyes and a serious demeanor that reminded Quinn of himself. He took to ranching naturally, following Quinn everywhere and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Sarah was his opposite, wild and laughing, with hair that blazed like autumn leaves and a fearless spirit that gave her parents equal amounts of joy and terror. When Daniel was 7 and Sarah 4, Amelia became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2 and Quinn worried constantly. But Amelia remained calm, reassuring him that her body knew what to do, and she was right. On a crisp autumn morning, she delivered twin boys, both healthy and strong, whom they named James and Joseph. 4 children, Quinn said in wonder, holding a twin in each arm while Amelia rested. "How did we get so blessed?" "We found each other in a blizzard," Amelia replied with a tired smile. "Everything after that has been a gift." The twins brought even more life and chaos to the household. Daniel stepped into his role as eldest with pride, helping to care for his younger siblings. Sarah appointed herself their protector and entertainer, creating elaborate games that usually ended with someone crying or laughing or both. The house was never quiet, never still, and Quinn loved every moment of it. When Daniel turned 10, Quinn began teaching him the deeper aspects of ranching, taking him on longer rides to check the herd, showing him how to read the land and the weather. One evening, as they rode back toward the house, Daniel asked the question Quinn had been both expecting and dreading. "Father," the boy said, his voice serious, "I heard some of the men in town talking. They said you are not my real father. Is that true? Quinn reined in his horse and waited for Daniel to do the same. He looked at his son, this boy who had his mother's eyes and another man's blood but Quinn's heart, and knew the time for truth had come. "Your birth father was a man named William Everhart," Quinn said carefully. "He was married to your mother before I met her. He died before you were born, and your mother was traveling to family when the blizzard hit. You were born in my barn that night, and I was the first person to hold you. From that moment on, you were my son. I have never thought of you as anything else." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Did you love my birth father?" "I never met him," Quinn admitted. "But I am grateful to him for giving the world you and for loving your mother. That does not change the fact that I am your father. I raised you, I love you, and nothing will ever change that. Do you understand?" The boy nodded slowly, then looked up with eyes that shone with tears. "I am glad you caught me that night. I am glad you are my father." Quinn pulled his son into a fierce embrace, his own eyes burning. "So am I, Daniel. So am I." They rode home as the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and gold. The house came into view, warm light spilling from the windows, and Quinn could see Amelia's silhouette moving inside. Sarah's laughter drifted out on the evening breeze, along with the twins' childish voices. It was everything Quinn had never known he wanted, everything he had found on that desperate winter night when a woman stumbled into his barn. Years continued to pass in their steady march. Daniel grew into a fine young man, tall and capable, staying on the ranch to work beside Quinn. Sarah eventually went east to attend a teaching college, returning 2 years later with a head full of ideas and a young surveyor named Thomas in tow. They married in the same little church in Florissant, where Quinn and Amelia had spoken their vows, and settled on land adjacent to the ranch. The twins, inseparable as always, decided to try their hand at starting a horse breeding operation with Quinn's support. They had a gift with animals that surpassed even Quinn's skills, and soon their horses were sought after throughout the territory. Through it all, Quinn and Amelia remained the steady center. Their love had not dimmed with time but had instead deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the desperate passion of that first year. They knew each other's rhythms, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with glances across crowded rooms. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick children and lean years, and emerged stronger each time. On the 20th anniversary of the night Daniel was born, Quinn and Amelia stood in the barn together. It had been expanded and improved over the years, but the corner where Amelia had given birth remained, a sacred space they both remembered. "Do you ever think about that night?" Amelia asked, her hand in Quinn's. "Every day," he admitted. "It was the night my life truly began. Before you, I was just existing. After you, I was living." Amelia leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They were both gray now, worn by years of hard work and marked by the passage of time, but the connection between them burned as bright as ever. "I used to feel guilty," she confessed quietly. "Guilty for falling in love with you so quickly after William died. Guilty for being happy when I should have been grieving. But I have come to understand that love is not limited. I loved William, and his memory will always be part of me. But loving you does not diminish that. If anything, it honors it, because William would have wanted Daniel and me to be happy and safe. He gave you to me," Quinn said. "In a way, he and that blizzard and fate all conspired to bring you into my barn that night. I will be grateful for it until my last breath." They stood together as darkness fell, watching through the barn door as lights came on in the main house where the twins still lived, and in Sarah's house just visible across the meadow. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking dinners and warm homes. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and horses nickering their evening greetings. It was a legacy built from nothing, from one desperate night and two people who chose to love despite fear and loss and uncertainty. It was imperfect and hard-won and absolutely beautiful. Quinn turned Amelia toward him, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for stumbling into my barn. Thank you for letting me catch our son. Thank you for every day since." "I love you too," Amelia whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you for being there. Thank you for catching us both." They kissed in the barn where their story began, surrounded by the ghosts of that desperate night and the weight of all the beautiful years that had followed. Outside, Wyoming stretched vast and endless under a sky full of stars, the same stars that had watched over a blizzard and a birth, and the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. Daniel visited the next morning with his wife Elizabeth and their two children. Over breakfast, surrounded by family and noise and life, Quinn caught Amelia's eye across the table and saw his own contentment reflected back at him. This was everything. This was the reward for opening his barn door on a desperate winter night. This was the result of choosing kindness over caution, of catching a baby in his hands and wrapping him warm, of loving a woman who had lost everything and giving her a reason to hope again. The ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of the family. Daniel proved to have an excellent head for business, modernizing operations while respecting the traditions Quinn had established. The twins' horse breeding venture exceeded all expectations, bringing in steady income and recognition from across the region. Sarah's children, now old enough to ride, spent their summers on the ranch, learning the same lessons their grandfather had taught their mother. Quinn officially retired from daily operations when he turned 60, though retirement for him meant simply doing less rather than stopping altogether. He still rose before dawn most days, still walked the property checking fences and watching the herd, still maintained the barn with meticulous care. But now he had time for other things too, teaching his grandchildren to fish in the creek, building toys in his workshop, sitting on the porch with Amelia, and watching the sun set over land they had tamed together. One evening, as they rocked in chairs Daniel had built for their 40th anniversary, Amelia said, "Do you have any regrets?" Quinn considered the question seriously, as he did all her questions. "Only that I did not find you sooner, that we did not have more time." "We have had a good amount of time," Amelia said practically, but her eyes were soft. "And we have made the most of every minute. Not everyone can say that." "No," Quinn agreed. "Not everyone can." They watched as Daniel worked in the distance, training a young horse in the corral. His movements were patient and sure, and Quinn saw himself in those gestures, passed down through teaching and example. Sarah emerged from her house with a basket of vegetables from her garden, waving as she headed toward the main house to help Elizabeth with dinner preparations. The twins were somewhere on the far pasture, moving cattle to fresh grazing land. It was a symphony of family and purpose, each member playing their part in the ongoing story of the ranch. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Amelia asked suddenly. "When Daniel was finally asleep, and I was so scared about what would happen next." Quinn thought back across the decades to that exhausted, triumphant moment. "I told you that you were safe, that I would not let anything happen to you." "You kept that promise," Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "For over 40 years you have kept that promise. You made me feel safe when I had lost everything. You gave me a home when I was wandering. You loved my son as your own. You gave me more children, a full life, happiness I never thought I would find again. Quinn, you saved us that night, but you have kept saving us every day since." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You saved me too. I was alone before you, going through the motions of living but never really alive. You brought light and warmth and purpose. You made this ranch a home instead of just a place to work. Everything good in my life stems from that night." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and orange, Quinn reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. A blizzard that could have been a tragedy had instead been a blessing. A desperate woman seeking shelter had become his wife, his partner, his everything. A baby born in a barn had become his son, and the foundation of a family that now stretched across 3 generations. Time marched on as it always does. Quinn's hair turned from gray to white, and his steps grew slower. Amelia developed arthritis in her hands but still insisted on helping in the garden and with the cooking. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that brought family and friends from across the territory. Daniel, now a grandfather himself, gave a speech that had everyone in tears, talking about the night he was born and the man who had caught him and wrapped him warm and loved him unconditionally. "My father," Daniel said, looking directly at Quinn, "taught me that family is not just blood. It is choice and commitment and love that shows up every single day. He chose to be my father before I even took my first breath, and he has never wavered in that choice. Everything I am, everything I have, I owe to him and to my mother." Quinn could barely see through his tears as his son, his firstborn, his boy from the barn, embraced him. The room erupted in applause, and Amelia's hand found his, squeezing tight. They had been given a gift, Quinn thought. Against all odds, in the middle of a blizzard, in a barn that should have been a tragedy, they had been given each other. And they had taken that gift and built something magnificent from it. As Quinn approached his 70th year, his health began to fail. It was nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. The doctor from Florissant told him to rest, to take it easy, and Quinn agreed because he knew Amelia worried. But secretly, he did not mind. He had lived a full and rich life, had loved and been loved, had built something lasting. When his time came, he would be ready, but that time was not yet. Quinn rallied, his stubbornness and Amelia's devoted care pulling him back from the edge. He walked slower and tired more easily, but he was still there, still present for his family. He held his newest great-grandchild, Daniel's grandson, and marveled at the chain of life that stretched back to that desperate night in the barn. "What will you name him?" Quinn asked Daniel, his voice raspy with age. "Quinn," Daniel said simply. "Quinn William, after both of his grandfathers, so the name continues." Quinn felt his eyes fill with tears for what seemed like the 1,000th time in recent years. To have his name carried forward, linked with William's, felt like a completion of something that had started 4 decades earlier. It was an acknowledgement that both men had played their part in this family's story, that both deserved to be remembered. On a summer evening when Quinn was 72, he and Amelia took a slow walk to the barn. It was a pilgrimage they made often now, returning to the place where their story had truly begun. They stood in the corner where Daniel had been born, where Quinn's life had changed forever, and they held each other as the sun set. "We have had a good run," Amelia said softly. She was 70 herself now, still beautiful in Quinn's eyes, her face lined with years of laughter and love. "The best," Quinn agreed. "No matter what comes next, I want you to know that I have been happier than I ever thought possible. You and the children and this life we built together, it has been everything." "We will have more years yet," Amelia said firmly, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We will watch little Quinn grow. We will celebrate more anniversaries. We will sit on that porch and hold hands and watch our family thrive. We are not done yet, Quinn Zeller." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "No, I suppose we are not." And she was right. They had more years, precious years filled with the simple joys of a life well lived. They saw little Quinn take his first steps, celebrated Sarah's daughter's wedding, welcomed more great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's leadership, and plans were already being made for the next generation to take over when the time came. On their 55th anniversary, the family gathered once again. Quinn was 75 now, frail but still sharp in mind and spirit. He sat in a chair of honor at the head of the long table they had set up outside, Amelia beside him, and looked out at the sea of faces that represented their legacy. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. It was overwhelming and humbling and absolutely perfect. Daniel stood to give another speech, his own hair now gray, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. "55 years ago," he began, "my mother stumbled into a barn during a blizzard. She was desperate and alone and about to give birth. My father, this man right here, could have turned her away. It would have been easier. But he did not. He helped her. He caught me when I came into this world. He wrapped me warm. And then he did something even more remarkable. He loved us. He chose us. He made us his family." Daniel's voice broke, and he paused to compose himself. "Every person at this table exists because of the choice my father made that night. Every happiness, every success, every love story that has bloomed in this family has its roots in that moment of kindness and courage. We are all here because Quinn Zeller opened his barn door and his heart to two strangers in need." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of people crying. Quinn looked around at all those faces, at the legacy that had grown from one night and one choice, and felt a peace settle over him that was almost transcendent. "I was the lucky one," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Your mother and Daniel gave me a purpose. They gave me a family. They gave me a reason to be more than just a man working land. I caught Daniel that night, but the truth is they caught me. They saved me. And I have been grateful every single day since." Amelia leaned over and kissed him, her tears mingling with his. Around them, their family erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just an anniversary but a love story that had spanned more than half a century and changed countless lives. As the party continued into the evening, Quinn sat with Amelia's hand in his and watched his family laugh and dance and live. This was immortality, he thought. Not living forever himself, but creating something that would continue long after he was gone. Daniel would carry on, and his children after him, and their children after that. The ranch would endure. The story would be told. And somewhere in the future, perhaps a new great-great-grandchild would stand in that barn corner and hear about the night their great-great-grandfather caught a baby during a blizzard and wrapped him warm and changed the course of countless lives. Quinn lived to see his 78th birthday, surrounded by his family in the home he had built with his own hands so many years ago. Amelia was beside him, as she had been for 58 years, her hand in his. When he closed his eyes for the last time, it was with a smile on his face and love in his heart. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he had worked and loved. The entire family gathered, along with friends from across Wyoming and Colorado, to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Daniel, now in his 70s himself, delivered the eulogy, his voice strong despite his tears. "My father taught me that the measure of a man is not what he acquires, but what he gives. He gave everything. His strength, his time, his love, his very life. He asked for nothing in return except the chance to work hard and love his family. He was a cowboy, a rancher, a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. But most of all, he was good, simply, profoundly good. And the world is better because he was in it. Amelia stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, her hand on the simple wooden cross that marked Quinn's resting place. She was 80 years old now, and the thought of continuing without him seemed impossible. But she knew what he would want. He would want her to keep living, to keep loving, to keep being the center that held their family together. She lived another 5 years, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. They buried her beside Quinn on that hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The double headstone bore simple words, Quinn and Amelia Zeller. Beloved parents, together forever. The ranch passed to Daniel, as had always been planned, and he continued his parents' legacy with the same dedication and love they had shown. The story of the night he was born became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The barn was maintained with special care, that corner preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Years turned into decades, and the Zeller family continued to grow and thrive. New loves bloomed, new children were born, new challenges were faced and overcome. But always at the center of it all was the memory of Quinn and Amelia, of the blizzard that brought them together, of the baby caught and wrapped warm, of the love that had grown from desperation into something eternal. On the 100th anniversary of Daniel's birth, the family gathered once more at the ranch. Daniel himself had passed 20 years earlier, but his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came to celebrate and remember. They stood in the barn in that sacred corner, and the oldest among them told the story one more time. It was a story about kindness and courage, about opening doors and catching babies, about choosing love over fear, family over convenience, connection over isolation. It was a story about a cowboy who caught a baby during a blizzard and wrapped him warm, never knowing that simple act would create a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story about Quinn and Amelia, whose love had been tested by hardship and proven true by time, who had built something beautiful from nothing, who had loved fiercely and lived fully, who had shown everyone who knew them what it meant to be good. And as the family stood together in that barn, feeling the weight of history and the strength of their connection to each other, they understood that this was what immortality really meant. Not living forever as individuals, but creating love and family and stories that would echo through time long after the original voices had fallen silent. The blizzard had ended over a century ago. The barn had been rebuilt twice. The land had changed hands through inheritance. But the love that started on that desperate winter night continued to live, continued to grow, continued to warm the hearts of everyone it touched. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Quinn and Amelia were together, hands entwined, watching over the family they had created and smiling at the beautiful, complicated, perfect legacy they had left behind.